Well, I was initially taking a class actually in Flash, which was the precursor to Animate, which is what we've been working on. And this is about 12 years ago, and I loved it. I loved the sense of control, the sense of storytelling. And then what happened was the professor sort of mentioned this new software called Maya that was sort of taking over the industry. And so I took a look and did some research on that, and I got hooked. Ah, okay. Well, I would actually say that even before that, I worked for a PBS Kids show called Word World, where I did some animation, and there I learned a lot. Probably the main thing is that I come from an acting background since I was a professional actor for 17 years, and acting and animation are quite mixed in terms of how they feed off of each other. And so that sort of a sense of timing and a sense of theatricality was something that I sort of had to start out with. So I was at an advantage in that respect in terms of animation. And, so then when I got to working both at NYU, which sort of helped me understand particularly the importance of how movement will gain a viewer's attention over anything else. And in terms of my experience at Word World, the kids show that I worked on, more importantly, I worked with a fantastic creative director there, and I learned a huge amount from him because he had a lot of experience in terms of just posing characters in a theatrical way. Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I encourage my students to take an acting class. One of the things is timing cannot be taught. So timing is something that some people are very fortunate to just have naturally, um, but other people probably have to. It's learned through experience, and of course, acting is a wonderful way to learn timing through experience because you actually act that out and work out timing, and you start to sort of feel it in your body. So that was something that sort of grew, and I had the experience. I remember when I took a few classes in 3D modeling and animation, the professor knew my background, but none of the other students did, and he at the end sort of told students of my background and sort of said, so take an acting class. And I've used that. And what's been interesting about it is that I was actually hired at NJIT to create a class for their students and their program that was called Acting Fundamentals for Animators. And I've since, after creating that, I've since seen, I think, two books that have come out that are sort of based on that. Oh, that's a great question. I mean, in terms of teaching, or yeah, I mean that's a really great question. I mean, I think that just like when you are learning animation, you have to be willing to make mistakes and not be too hard on yourself. So you're going to learn the most from making those mistakes. So I'm sure I made tons of mistakes when I was first starting to teach it. I had a pretty good idea based on and I used some of the stuff that I had learned in the few classes that I had taken. And then just having had some professional experience, it allows you to expand on that. And then, now I go to 3 conferences a year where I learn things all the time. And to be able to share that with the students sort of is incredibly helpful. But I would say the main thing is allow yourself to make mistakes and don't be too hard on yourself when you come away from a class and you go, I kind of messed that up. Because probably it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. And the other thing is you write a little note to yourself and you learn from that. Well, I mean, it sounds like such a cliche, but Pixar, I mean, the ability to make a great story with this art, and the fact that Pixar sort of are notorious or famous for the fact that they can tell a story that works both for kids of a certain age, younger age, but also work on a completely different level for adults. I remember going to see oh, what is the one with the balloons? Up, right? Seeing that with my oldest son when he was quite a bit younger, and coming out of that, and I sort of asked him before. I said, which character did you empathize with? And he said, oh, the kid, like that. He was like, absolutely sure. And inside, and I said, oh, that's so funny because I totally empathized with the guy who played the old man. I totally got it. I don't like to think of myself as an old guy, but I just totally understood where he was coming from, and I read it. And so Pixar is brilliant that way in telling stories. But I also, there was another animation that I think this may have been DreamWorks, I'm not sure, one of their first, but it was called, not Happy Feet, but it was another penguin one. Yeah, you can tell me.
Is it Surf's Up?
Yeah, Surf's Up.
That was by Sony Pictures Animation.
Sony Pictures. Okay, fantastic. You know about more than I do. But I remember seeing that, and seeing that what was amazing to me about that animation was it was kind of written and acted in terms of the characters, kind of like a sitcom. It was kind of like a comedy movie.
It was like a mockumentary.
Yeah, it was a mockumentary, and the thing is it was so realistic, and I remember seeing that the vegetation was so realistic, and yet it was these cartoonish characters, but they were almost real, and so it was a really interesting. I suddenly saw the possibility of this art really producing stuff that we just 100% believed. That wasn't necessarily cartoonish in the form of like old-fashioned Disney, but it was like felt real. But it was like penguins walking around talking to each other. It was amazing. I think that it's a combination. One is, and I've talked to other professors of animation about this, is that students come in, which is wonderful, with they're incredibly excited. But you have to harness that as a professor. But at the same point is they come in with ambitions, which is great, but ambitions that are just impossible to realize. So they'll come in with the idea that they're going to create a Pixar short in their first week, and it's never going to happen. It's incredibly time-consuming work, and what people don't realize is they just have to look at the credits as they roll for something like Finding Nemo or something, and realize, and it goes on for days almost. It feels like in terms of the credits, the amount of people that were involved. So it's a mixed bag. It's this sense of you're very fortunate to be teaching a bunch of students who, on the whole, are incredibly excited about producing that work. So that's fun to harness. But at the same time, you have to set realistic goals. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's fun to see this software now particularly because the problem with Flash was it couldn't deal initially with iPods and iPhones. It's really, I mean, it was Steve Jobs who destroyed Flash in a way, because he basically said he wasn't going to include Flash in the operating system for iPhones. It was interesting to see over the years and follow, because everyone said Flash is dead, but basically they created a software that just can be exported out to all these different ways, these different builds, basically. So it's great. So there's a lot of similarities. It can do some more things. I mean, one of the things that you've heard me express is sort of the fun of the fact that it's a little bit more flexible in terms of the drawing and the curves. You're able to squash and stretch and create sort of more organic shapes and animate more organic shapes more easily. I mean, there was a lot in Flash when I first studied it, which was it was very much like, you would have a circle that would go across the screen and that kind of thing, and it wasn't quite as flexible as it is now, which is fun. The thing that to me to remember is that the same principles, those 12 principles of animation, work both in 2D, which Animate is largely 2D, even though you can fake 3D. And 3D. So it's exactly the same principles that are at work there. So it's really, if you know those principles and you work with those principles, you're going to be okay. yes. I am interested in Animate. I'm interested in a lot of possibilities. There's just so many softwares. It's kind of crazy. It's hard to keep up with it. I mean, there's also After Effects, which is a great software that can be used for animation as well. That needs to be taught. You almost need a class in that. So it depends. Like for instance, if I had a 4-year curriculum instead of a 2-year curriculum, which is what I teach, or if my degree, the degree that I teach, the animation and game design degree, was something that was um, on its own as opposed to sharing, a lot of its core classes with the photography major or the advertising graphic design majors, then I would be able to sort of construct a core curriculum that would include something like Animate, would include something like After Effects. But right now I don't have that flexibility. Another good question. Yes, I mean, and I do freelance once in a while. I've done some work. NYU has actually contracted me to work on certain educational animations. I do, will do freelance work for studios in New York. When I have time. I've been incredibly busy setting up the program at Middlesex. So that has really taken up all my time, and I actually chose that line of work because I actually enjoyed that more. For a variety of reasons. First of all, I really enjoy the interaction with the students. It's really sort of the lifeblood to what I do in many respects. But the other thing is, after many, many years of working on in professions that required freelance and required constantly be looking for work, that adds another pressure. Now, when you're young and that's something that maybe you enjoy. I've talked to people who freelance and prefer freelancing because they're not sort of beholden to one company, and I get that. I would say that the one issue that I do not enjoy as much about freelance work or about even working in a production situation is the fact that you're constantly under deadline, and the deadlines are very, very strict. And it means pulling some late hours, and maybe I'm just at a stage in my life when I prefer something where that's again more flexible and a little bit more relaxed, and where I get the feedback immediately from the students that whether I'm making sense to them or not. Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate your patience with me on that because we've sort of worked together, like learning it. It's been kind of fun. I hope I hope that you've enjoyed it as well in terms of the fact that we're kind of sometimes working things out together. Because for me, it's sort of familiarizing, sort of re-familiarizing, but also noticing that there are things that are different. But ultimately, what's key is now you're sort of stepping up and doing your own, you sort of creating your own stuff with Animate, and then it's a question, you can come to me and sort of show me the work, and I can sort of point out things that I think you might want to, edit or fix based on just a knowledge of animation. And so it's been fun. I mean, for me, it's been fun about working things out, and I think so sometimes students, there's so much, you can never know everything, right? And what's so great about this field and about, the advances in technology is that you're constantly learning. At my age, even in 5 years' time, I will still be learning stuff. In 10 years' time, I'll still be learning stuff, and that's really, really exciting to me. So I think that sometimes it's not a bad thing for a student, and I do this with my colleges. Like they're learning stuff. I'm providing them with software that I've only barely touched sometimes, like a tree making software called Speed Tree. And so that they're like they laugh when I say, you know what, actually I'm not sure about that because I haven't yet had time to figure it out, and then we try and figure it out together. So while the stuff that I consider myself somewhat an expert at, that's what I focus on, but when I want to provide students sometimes with cutting edge elements that I sometimes I haven't had, they're maybe only 1 week behind me in those cases, and I could sort of not present those opportunities to my students, but I also think it's important that they see that it's no one knows everything, and that you do have to work things out, and that even I sit with them and I'll troubleshoot things. And that's important.